Welcome back to Become a Calm Mama. Today on the podcast, I am interviewing Tracy Yokas, who is the author of a memoir called Bloodlines, a memoir of harm and healing. And on the podcast, we talk about her journey as a mother of a teenager who went through a mental health crisis, particularly dealing with eating disorders and self-harm in terms of cutting. And Tracy so beautifully describes in her book and on this podcast sort of what the struggle was, like how hard it is to have a child going through a mental health crisis, and then some of the things that she learned through the process that helped her cope and heal and have her daughter heal as well. Now, this memoir is written 10 years later, and so her daughter is healthy and they have a beautiful relationship, and her daughter gives her permission to share her story. I wanted to first just let you know that if this episode might be difficult for you to hear about these things, or if it might scare you to think about a teenager going through something hard, like maybe you have a 4-year-old and you already have some anxiety about them when they're teenagers, you don't have to listen to this episode. Like, you could just skip it. But if you have a daughter or a son who has some mental health issues and you are struggling with them and you're worried about them, or you're in any sort of area of your life where your kids, either they have a medical crisis or they have a mental health crisis, then this episode is going to be really, really helpful for you. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Tracy, and then we're going to hop right into the episode. Like I said, Tracy Yokas is the author of Bloodlines, a memoir of harm and healing. The book came out this past year. Tracy earned her master's degree in counseling psychology, and she lives in Newbury Park near me with her family, her cats, and her fish. And when she's not writing about mental health, she can be found playing with paint, glitter, and glue. She loves to bring people together through art in order to help women in their journey towards authenticity. And she creates safe spaces where art, words, and vulnerability meet. I think you will love this episode with her. You're going to love listening to her and learning more about her journey. Yeah, we talk about how important compassion is and what it's really truly like to sit in a big feeling cycle when your child is really struggling, and how to be that compassionate witness that we always talk about on this podcast. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right. I am so excited to introduce to you all Tracy Yokas. I introduced her in our intro. And so welcome, Tracy. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. I was just telling you that we just met, and it's so great. Like, so nice to meet you. And I was saying to you that I loved your book. If you could just tell us a little bit about your book, the title, and kind of share a little bit about it, and then we'll get into like all the part that I loved and the nitty-gritty of it all.
Oh, the juicy goodness.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So the name of the book is Bloodlines, a memoir of harm and healing. I like to start out by saying two things. One is it took me over a decade to write it. So it was definitely a labor of love. And I didn't realize as I was going through the process, but it was a huge component. Coming back to the page over and over and over again was a huge component in my own healing journey. So I just like to set the stage with that. And I also like to say that I feel like it should be obvious, but it's not in today's day and age, that I have my family's permission. We are all in our own ways very passionate advocates for talking about mental health, mental illness, recovery. So I just like people to know right off the bat that, yes, I had my family's permission to tell our story.
Yeah, right. Because the book is a very intimate journey into kind of a year in your life when you were handling or dealing with a mental health crisis with your teenage daughter, Faith. At the time, she was in 8th grade. Yeah, like 13 to 14.
Correct. It was the summer. My mom passed away suddenly the summer before her 8th grade year. So it started a little before that, but then yes, through that and slightly beyond.
Yeah. And now she, a decade later, she's like a grown adult. And so we can all feel very hopeful that the things that you learned through that experience and what Faith learned and how you grew together really set you all up for, the future. Of course, it's not perfect. None of us have a perfect you know, Mary Poppins world. We're all dealing with things, but both created, and your husband too, a foundation for having these deeper, meaningful, connected conversations and how to support each other and all the tools and stuff we're going to get into. So beautiful.
100%. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So, I was kind of summarizing that the book is about, healing from grief, which I do really think about grief in a very specific way. It's not just sadness, it's like a loss of something that you cannot get back. And in this case, it was your mom passing away suddenly, like you said. So you're in your grief process. Your daughter was close to her, so you're both kind of experiencing grief. And then generational trauma, so your own kind of childhood woundedness and whatever you brought to parenting, which we all do. And then how that affected Faith and what kind of showed up for her was this eating disorder, self-harm, depression, anxiety. So we had these like precipitating things coming into the soup, and then what that journey looked like for Faith. So we're going to talk a lot about kind of your experience having a child go through a mental health crisis, and in particular her eating disorder and self-harm. So I wondered if you could just start by talking to us about what you learned about eating disorders and self-harm in that process. Because for a lot of us, if you haven't dealt with that yourself or had a family member, you're thrown in. You don't even know what you don't know at that time. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah. And well, thank you for that intro. That covered a lot of ground. Yes. So that was her first symptom about 3 weeks after my mom passed away, as you eloquently pointed out. And just anecdotally, the more of these conversations I have, the more often I hear this same story,
Mm-hmm.
that the young person experienced the loss of someone significant in their life, and that precipitated a much more significant mental health crisis. So I hope that whoever studies this sort of thing is really doing some more in-depth work around that, because it feels to me, and again, I am not a clinician. I do have a master's degree in counseling psychology, which I had before my daughter became ill, which back then was just one more thing I used to punish myself for somehow being unable to prevent, this from happening to us. But I really think there's a piece of something missing there. I don't know what it is. I don't pretend to know what it is, but something about this idea of loss at that critical phase in our development in those teen years that we're missing about how to help our kids with that experience. But that aside, yes, I mean, she woke up one day and she just suddenly wasn't, as hungry as she was, and she began eating less. But that very quickly escalated into not really wanting to eat anything at all. And I knew quickly, so it was not something that took months and months and months to identify. I knew pretty quickly that she was not consuming enough food to stay healthy through puberty, and she was an athlete and all the things. So we went to visit the pediatrician, who for the first visit was, you need a little more nutrition. Let's try this, that, and the other. And me patting myself on my back because, yeah, that's good mothering. I didn't, do all whatever. So, I mean, obviously, we know already that did not help. And so it was a kind of a steady decline. So, what I learned about eating disorders, which I hope people really hear this, because I think we're so skewed in this culture about the female form and food and weight and body image. And, the idea that thinness has been so popularized and is so important, it can be easily missed by people who don't have experience with these sorts of things, that this is a serious mental illness. It is a real illness. It's not someone who's just vain. And this was reinforced as we got into the treatment with her first therapist and nutritionist. Eating disorders are not about retaliation to us as parents. They are really about someone struggling in their own life with powerlessness and control issues, and someone who really has low self-esteem. And I know that was true in my own case in my childhood, which I try to chronicle in the book, my own journey and the patterns in my family early on with weight, food, and body image issues. And didn't really overlay that with myself until much later down the line. But these are not ways that were just like, oh, I just want to look better, so I'm going to not eat at all. I mean, it's much more complicated than that.
Yes, for sure. I loved it in your book. You said eating disorders are an unhealthy attempt to change low self-esteem and their coping mechanism for being terrified of not measuring up. And I have shared on this podcast about my own struggle. I am in recovery for eating disorder. And it it really was like to see one sentence like an unhealthy attempt to change low self-esteem and then a coping mechanism. And one thing we talk about on this podcast a lot is that all behavior is a strategy to communicate, cope, or change our circumstance. And when we go into we're going to wrap up the podcast later about talking about compassion, but when you really deeply understand that it's a strategy for something that's going on inside, even if it's an eating disorder or self-harm, and it's not against you, it's not personal, it's not because you did something wrong. It's just where they're at. That's their way that they have found to relieve the pressure or, get control back or maybe control the way they look or the way they appear. And um yeah, just really deeply understanding that I think is so helpful for anyone who's struggling with themselves, even like, oh, I'm in restrictive dieting or I'm overeating or whatever it is, because I don't feel good inside. Not because I don't know, I'm lazy or I'm not, I don't know, whatever negative self-talk we have. Um, how are eating disorders and self-harm tied together? Because I do see this in my practice a lot with young women, young girls, that they kind of go together. And you really articulate that in the book. And I wondered if you could share about that.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, that was something that I learned through doing my own research. So, why that is true, I don't really know. I mean, it's just been proven in study and study and study after study that it is true. And what I am trying to do in the book, which is not a clinical way of describing these things, but is to broaden the perspective because we all have unhealthy coping mechanisms. They might not be classically identified as self-harm the way we mean it when we're talking about what happened in my family situation or when we're talking about it in a clinical setting. But I feel that way that many of us, most of us, all of us use some form of coping mechanisms sometimes that could be considered self-harming. So
Yes,
for me,
overeating. I mean,
yeah,
overworking, over
exactly.
shopping, like, not balancing my own budget, spending money when I don't have it, or
Drinking an
self.
entire bottle of wine every
Yes,
night.
exactly.
Yeah,
Self-flagellating even is self-harm, right? If I look good and I got it all together and I'm super mom, but then deep down I'm always just criticizing, like you talk about that, yourself self-flagellating. That's self-harm, right? Like we're hurting
exactly.
ourselves. And so
Hmm.
yes, all of these are strategies. I do like one thing that you pointed out in the book was that, and I think this is really helpful if someone has a child who's kind of in the self-harm cutting, you know, essentially we're talking about cutting and also restrictive dieting or overeating or bulimia, that as one gets kind of settled, like the if you like, okay, I'm eating well and I'm not overeating, I'm not undereating, there you'll see the cutting come back, and then the cutting declines, and then you might see the anorexia or the bulimia or the restrictive dieting come back. And I was like, whoa, those are really tethered. And it's like when you lose one coping strategy, sometimes you just replace it with another harming one. And like until you really replace all like both of them with new strategies, you might see this back and forth. And as a parent, you're like, we've already dealt with that one. And then it's back. Like I yeah, wondered how much you saw that kind of back and forth.
Well, 100%. And I mean, that was the way that one of the women who ran one of the clinics that my daughter attended described it as the whack-a-mole. As
Hmm.
soon as you get one symptom down, something else pops up, and then you're working on that one, something else pops up, and that's exactly what our experience was like. And, you're also talking about teenagers. So there's already like the whole teen aspect of things that is chaotic in and of itself. And again, I'm going to say this, I might sound like a broken record by the time we're done, but it's like we all do that.
Yeah.
So it maybe is certainly more dramatic when the behaviors are endangering someone's life. That is something that was very true in our circumstance for my daughter, and especially self-harming has an addictive quality to it, so that the person needs to engage in more of it to feel the same internal relief. And again, I just want to say the reason I wanted to be so open and vulnerable about this with our story is because, first of all, of how many people are experiencing things similar to what we are going through. We know, especially post pandemic, all the metrics are headed in the wrong direction. So we just have to start talking about this stuff. But is also because if we take just a slightly wider view, I mean, we all have the tendency to judge, and like, we're just going to be honest about it. Like, people listening to this might be like, oh my God, that's so this, that, and the other. But if we just broaden out a little bit, it's really not that different than so many things that any of us engage in when we're not feeling great about ourselves.
Hmm.
So, and I'll be the first person to say me. I
Hmm.
mean, my own coping skills were not great at this time. So, how did I cope? I gained 40 pounds over the first
Hmm.
year. I drank a lot because my need to numb the pain of what we were experiencing was just so high. And also because of the type of past that I had no other skills, but this is not conscious, right? I didn't sit
Yeah.
down going, I'm going to
You know what
overeat
I'm going to do
every
to
night.
cope?
Yeah.
I'm going to eat and drink. Yeah, no.
Exactly. I mean, but because of my past and the issues that I didn't even realize I was fully grappling with, I didn't have other healthier ways to deal with the pain that I was experiencing and feeling so powerless to help my child. So again, I'm just trying to show we're, normal people sitting here. We're not, whatever. And yet these things can happen. They can happen to anyone. So if you're listening and this is your situation right now, I just want you to know that you are not alone.
Yeah, it's so good. I think I was laughing about it's not conscious until it is. Then when you become
Right.
really aware of your strategy, then they lose a little bit of the like effectiveness. I'm like, ugh, my new one of my strategies right now is I do a little like boredom online shopping. And there's like a certain period of time during the week when I think I'm a little restless, and I like find myself buying stupid stuff. And I'm like, oh, I'm doing it. Like, it must mean that I have some unmet need or something. So even like looking on the outside, you would be like, wow, that's such a terrible habit. It's not. Sometimes we do harming ones, sometimes we don't. But the more aware we are of why we're doing it and what's happening. And I love that you said symptom. I think it's so beautiful to think about these behaviors, especially in a mental health crisis like this, as a symptom, because, like in the medical world, right, a symptom is because there's a root cause. And so, yeah, if you just keep trying to prevent this symptom from happening or prevent this behavior, we're going to do abstinence over here and we're going to, you know, take all the sharps, which you need to do. But also, eh, your daughter had to kind of get to the bottom of where she was coming from, what was going on inside, and learn that self inquiry and that root, the root issues. And that's what we all have to do.
Right, I agree. And I think, that was part of our journey, was just enough time going by that she had the work that she was doing in her own therapy and in treatment and all the steps that we took to start to mature a little bit and explore what was going on in her. And I think, that's such an important point, because a huge part of this book, and we'll probably touch on it again, but is we can only actually do our own work. So, as parents, of course, especially as moms, we want to fix, We want to eliminate the pain. I mean, that's a normal thing to feel, especially then we want the behaviors to stop because the behaviors are what we see, they're what we're experiencing. So, that's chaos every day. That's impacting everybody in the family. That's all the angst and everything going on. And there's very little reprieve from that when you're actually in the throes of, the situation in full force. But ultimately, I think it did us a disservice. And again, this is not something I could have identified at the time, but it did us a disservice to be so hyper focused on the behavior. It's not like we didn't know there was more going on, but again,
Mhm.
because the behavior is what you see, the behavior is what you experience, the behavior is what scares you, the behavior is what overwhelms you. It gets very easy to get lost in that aspect of it. And that's where we can lose our compassion if we even know how to have it in the first place. It just becomes very complicated when you're facing these things day in and day out and day in and day out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we think, oh, if we can get them to just stop, like just eat a banana and everything will be okay.
Right.
I think there was like one part in your book where like she ate a banana and you're like, okay. And you know, but then you find that there she's cutting again or and it's just it can be so difficult to have those behaviors and they're scary, right? They're like her health, her well-being, her physical body was like in danger. And so as a mom, it's very scary, of course. It's one thing if you have like a perfectionist kid who's just really obsessed with their homework. You're like, that's not healthy, but like it's okay.
Right.
Like it's
College, here we come.
yeah, like it won't hurt them that much. I mean, we are still worried, but when you see somebody hurting their body, it can be you're like, just stop doing that, please. And she's like, I can't. And it feels so difficult. You're both kind of at odds. I wanted to get into because I have coached a lot of people through my career that have gone through these mental health crises with their teens or their even their younger kids or their young adults. And I was as I was reading your book, really kind of like the visceral experience of how all encompassing it is and the toll of it. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about it so that it can normalize for those who are going through it. I love you said, everyone else went about their lives. We went to appointments. If that doesn't summarize what it's like when you have a kid in crisis, I don't know what else does. It's like, yeah. Um, so I wanted you to tell us a little bit more about like what that was like to lose sort of, I don't know, time and all that. Um, Yeah. What was it like to experience that
Yeah.
loss? Yeah.
Well, I mean, the short answer is devastating.
Mm.
I mean, whatever normal means, whatever that is, our lives were normal. And then literally almost like the flip of a switch, they
Mm.
know it no longer was. And so that looked different over the course of time, but the ultimate fact remained the same that we had been going about our lives and my daughter had her life and her thing and my husband and I when and then we didn't. And it
Mhm.
is hard to describe to someone who has had no experience with something like this, how isolating it is, how terrifying. I mean, I think, of course, when someone says something on the surface, oh yeah, that must be really hard. But unless you've actually experienced what it means to have the rug pulled from under your feet relative to every part of your life. So withdrawing from my own friends, withdrawing from my own activities, I was so committed in a very unhealthy way, I want to say. Again, I didn't understand it this way at the time. It was just what I needed to do. I'm going to solve this. I'm going to get on this. I'm going to do the research, read the books, learn the thing, solve the problem. And that is a product of sort of my childhood and the kind of enmeshed and over identified relationships that I experienced on one hand. And so
And
you,
also mom world a little bit. There, I mean, I want to like people are listening to this podcast because they're like, I want solutions. I want to have to like figure out how to parent my kid, right? Like there's this almost misbelief that if we had more information, it would be okay. or something. Like we could find the right blankety blank. So yeah, it's like your own trauma and your own background and hyperproductivity and solving your problems and things like that, coping. But then also there's a fallacy in mom world, I think that yeah.
100%. I mean, I could not agree with you anymore.
Mhm.
100%. I mean, it's just an entire misunderstanding. And as you already said, we're going to get to self-care again later, but like, what is the point of self-care and why do we as moms actually do need to put ourselves first and just let go of the myth that that means we're selfish or fill in the word that's right for you. All the things that are tied up in that, which is a lot. But 100%, I mean, I was operating under a bunch of false assumptions about what I was supposed to do and how I was supposed to be, and then having those core wounding from my way, 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 way back of not being good enough and all of that stuff being 100% ignited and exacerbated because of the loss of control over my family's well-being. That's a
Mhm.
fallacy. Of course, I actually had no control, but I didn't really know
You had
that
no control in
until
the beginning, and
right,
you didn't really lose anything, but the perception that you lost
right.
it, that you had to get it back. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Exactly,
I know.
exactly. Which was, a large part of my journey was actually changing my thinking on things. So it's
Yes, for
not
sure.
like, it's not a Cheryl Strayed book where I walked, 1,500 miles and suddenly I'm like a new person. I mean, I emotionally walked probably 1,500 miles, but you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
I
But
do.
yes, I mean, we don't even know the baggage a lot of the time that we carry with us because we're conditioned before we have thoughts and words and we're going back to really old business and we just know what we know and we don't know what we don't know, and when it comes to this kind of stuff, until there's a reason, we don't even question any of that. So it was like I didn't have a reason to question to this degree. Like I had relationships, friendships particularly, not pan out time and time again, and that was very painful. But until it was my daughter, till the
Mhm.
suffering was so extreme and the person I love most in the entire world, far more than I loved myself, was suffering. And there was nothing I could do about it, that I hit my emotional rock bottom and realized I can't go on like this. Like my work is the only work I can actually do, and I need to start doing it.
Yeah. And I do want to clarify for anyone listening, including us, because we have a lot of agency. We actually do. We have a lot of influence over our kids and our family. But we don't need to change the circumstance to feel better. And I think we get stuck on like, once I can solve this problem, quote unquote problem that my child is having, then I'll feel better or then we'll be okay. And it kind of is flip. It's like, let me be okay in this circumstance and figure out how to come to peace, which is actually just such a mind fuck to say, like, let me come to peace with my child harming themselves and starving. Like that that's so counterintuitive, but it actually is a big part of your journey, was sort of getting to a place of I really can't fix, quote unquote fix, nor is it my job to fix Faith and your daughter's name. And you know, so I've got to figure out something else. And you started to pivot and grow inside of yourselves and heal. And a memoir of harm and healing is really your story more than it is Faye's. Like her memoir is going to be different when she writes her story.
100%.
Yeah, you're telling your journey in this book of like what you were working on with your therapist and what you were learning by going to, whatever parent ed stuff and all that. Um, so before we go there, I want to talk all about what you learned and like the things that you shifted. I just want to like put a pin right where we were because it really is hard. That period of time, it was like October to October, really till the end of till the next school year started, a whole school year that, people are going, you had to cancel the eighth grade trip. She didn't get to go to DC. Your holidays were wonky. You didn't get Thanksgiving was kind of a shit show. Like it just was like, though that granular experience of it being so odd and off. And like everyone's like, what are you doing for summer? Are you going to summer camp? La, la, la. And you're like, we're going to residential. Like I just feel for you in that period of your life and any mom who's going through that. It's like you feel like you don't belong in the mom world anymore or something like that, or as your family is broken. And yeah.
Absolutely. And, if you feel like, I mean, what you just described is a perfect reason why people isolate. Because, why are you going to want to go out to coffee with your friends if they're going to be talking about dress shopping for prom or, all the things like
Hmm.
you said, DC, when none of that is within your realm of possibility. So you already are terrified and exhausted and overwhelmed and all the things. And then you, of course, are going to withdraw from your life because it seems like you have nothing to say. There's nothing that you can add to those conversations, and you don't want to hear those conversations because your child isn't able to participate in any of those activities. So why would you want to be present to listen to people talking about how great X, Y, or Z is? So on one hand, it makes complete sense to withdraw from your own life and to withdraw from activities and even things that maybe don't involve like your normal school mom friends or whatever, but like everybody's going about their lives and you're not. The other side of that coin, though, is that the isolation is a vicious cycle, I guess I want to
Mm,
say. So you're feeling, at least I did, I'll only speak for myself, feeling so bad because of, again, some of my skewed thinking about what I was supposed to be doing and what I could control and what I couldn't, and all the things that exacerbated within me. So that pulled me further and
mhm,
further and
mhm,
further
mhm,
away.
mhm. Yes.
So
Yes, you
then,
you isolate because you can't relate or you don't feel relatable, but then you actually then are even
you're
more disconnected within
exactly.
yourself and others. So then you're like, well, something's really wrong with me and I'm really now a mess. And you just, yeah, you keep spiraling
Right.
away
And it
from
becomes a
care.
self-fulfilling prophecy because like you don't want to be around anyone, you're convinced no one wants you around, and this shit's hitting the fan everywhere, so why would you be around anyone anyway? And that was definitely a part, even though she wasn't presenting it to me that way, why my therapist kept asking me what I could do was, encouraging me to figure out for myself what was something that would enable me to be less alone. And
Mm,
part of the process, I should say, part of the process, excuse me, part of the process requires us to not be alone in the sense of going to treatment. So as treatment escalated, so did our participation. It was required. So when she ended up going to the eating disorder clinic, that's where there was couple therapy and family therapy. And I had gotten in my own individual therapy right away. So I don't want to say we never were around other people because we were, which can be validating in the treatment setting. I mean, that's why, they do it. But it's hard to describe if you haven't been through it, but it's a different quality of togetherness. And it's not the things that you used to do that gave you joy and peace and contentment and connection and all those things that you get by being in relationship and community with people doing joyful things. Going to therapy in a family group setting is really not that joyful,
mm,
especially starting out.
yeah.
So it's a different granular quality that anyone who has had to do it will know exactly what we're talking about.
You have
But
a
it is very hard.
community, but it's a very it's based on a symptom almost, right? It's based on a circumstance. Although we do create communities around what our kids go to this school or they're in this program or whatever it is, but we have these relationships either within that community or outside that community that aren't just about that. Like we go to coffee or we go for a hike or we like get together for a book club, like stuff like that. That's not let's talk about our child's painful behavior. It's you get to you have a little more freedom in what you're going to discuss because it's the environment's different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not Not that it should be, but it's again, it can be reassuring, but it's not like fun to hear other families talking about the struggles with their children. So it's not like, you're going to
No.
family group therapy and you're going to come out and you're going to be like energized and be like,
No.
yeah, that was awesome. I
Yeah.
mean, that's just not what it's about.
No, yeah, everybody is in pain, and that's what you're talking about. So yeah, I wanted just to really, it becomes all encompassing when you have a child who's a mental health crisis or ill. Like I've also had clients who've had kids with illness, and they're in the hospital all the time, and their child has a lot of physical problems, and that is really drains on your time, your money, your connectedness with others, your health, your marriage, just so much toll. So just to normalize that, and then also maybe give hope because that was a period of time and it started to shift. It felt like in the book, like almost as you shifted, she shifted. And I do notice this in my work where, and in myself, like if I'm struggling with one of my children's behaviors, or I'm anxious, or I have a lot of fear, or I'm very angry, or something like that, we're almost like we're stuck in it. And I sometimes call it like magic. It's like energetic. It's not, it's actually compassion. But we shift and we kind of take care of ourselves. We understand our child in a different perspective, see it from their lens. Then they can maybe see it from their own lens with love and care. You're caring for yourself. It becomes sort of that becomes your self fulfilling prophecy of, we're okay. And then you become okay. And your child needs to believe that. I like how your therapist said to you, Faith wants to see you taking care of yourself. Faith wants to know you're doing okay. And I think that's so important as a mom because we sometimes think I don't get to until my kids are okay. And there was a couple different lines on that in your book, how it's like you're only as happy as your unhappiest child or whatever it was. And it's like, no, that's actually not true. And I think of it this way, like, say my kid is struggling with something and they're sort of wondering if they're going to be okay. And they're like, see all the adults and all the parents staring at them like, whoa, that's, you're a bad kid. They're not doing their homework or they're acting out or whatever it is. And then they look at you and you're like, oh God, I don't know. This is bad. Where do they get their hope from? They're like, even the person who loves me, knows me the best, cares about me the most, is terrified. Like, I'm fucked. Like, I feel like a little kid even is like, I obviously I'm screwed because my mom even thinks I'm a disaster. And we shifting into like, I'm okay, you're okay, we're gonna get through this, you're strong. That building that up, and then your kid looks at you and sees that, I think that is really, really important. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to say about that, and I agree with everything you said. But for sure, like where I talk about this most in the book anyway, at least I think, is in relation to the decision to send our daughter to residential treatment. I mean, obviously, the message we were not trying to give her was that she was so broken that she couldn't even stay home anymore. Like that the situation was so bad, to your point, that there was nothing we could do. And like we were so scared and all the things, except that was all sort of true, only in the
Yes.
sense of there was nothing we could do.
Mhm.
And we were all terrified that her self-harming had escalated to the point where she could easily have accidentally died by suicide or maimed herself or something. But, yeah. So here we all are, this big system and all the people in it and the parents saying to her, like, this is so bad that this is what you have to do. Again, that's not the message we were trying to give her, but it makes sense that that would be, especially someone who is struggling with mental health issues. So, we're not talking about someone who's fully capable of being rational. with, their thinking. So it definitely compounds the problem. And I use the word system specifically, not only in relation to like the medical system, but I'm a family systems person in terms of a family as a system. So to your point, if one person in the system begins to change, then the whole is impacted because that's how it works. There's no choice but for that to be true. I do want to be careful not to imply that somehow magically, as soon as I was able to be more accepting, the sun came out and there was a rainbow and, we lived happily ever after. We are, in fact, living happily ever after, to your point, not perfectly, because no one is perfect, but it wasn't so immediately cause and effect, but
And that's not the
yes,
reason to do it either. Like, oh, let
exactly.
me get better than my kid. It's like, no, let me just figure out how to be okay.
Right.
Let me just, this is the worst thing that could ever happen to me. I'm in the absolute hell, and I still get to be a human and have all the scope of humanity, all the feelings. I get to feel joy. I get to feel sadness. I get to, you know, feel productive, whatever it is that you want to, feel. You're entitled to that. Um, yeah. So let's get into how what that was like for you, because I have kind of in my head looked at your healing journey in these three areas of the first was not, I don't know about first, but like for me, with the way I read it, like self-care, like you began to understand, like Kim was like, Faith wants to know you're doing okay, and Faith wants to see you taking care of yourself. And you start to do some things there. And then self-trust, and then self-love. Like self-love for me is like self-love, self-acceptance, self-kindness, self-compassion. It's all like this one bucket of
Yeah.
this thing that is like basically self-love. So I wondered if you could speak to those things, like how did you tap into deeper levels of self-care? What did that look like? How did you tap into some self-trust when, everyone is like, send her here, do this, you should have this kind of therapy, this modality, she should be home, she shouldn't be home, whatever. How did you find that? And then like this self-love and self-acceptance. So you can kind of like, it can be a soup. You can talk about all of
Yeah,
them.
well, yeah. So one thing I should say starting out, especially with my therapist, is she asked me that for over a year, maybe closer to 2 years, and I completely 100% missed that she was asking me to do the same thing that we wanted my daughter to do, like take better care of myself. I was so lost again in that low self-esteem and that ruminating, all the thinking that I had relative to, again, being an outcropping of a particular type of childhood. And this is not to blame my parents. I mean, like, I have more compassion for my parents, myself, my daughter, everybody than I ever had before now that I've been through this journey. So it's not about that, but it is about understanding what constrains us. So I was
Hmm.
very constrained in that department, and yeah, had a completely skewed view that, a good mother fully self-sacrifices, like everybody else has to be okay first. And, if you even get to put yourself on your list, maybe you went out for a mani-pedi, which of course I love, or a massage, that's all great. But yeah, so the first thing I had to do when I finally realized well into this process that had hit my emotional rock bottom, that I actually couldn't control anyone else but myself, that actually seeing a representation of my low self-esteem on a piece of paper in an exercise we did in residential treatment, and seeing that my daughters closely resembled mine, like that there were reasons for that, and that was my responsibility, that taking care of myself, healing myself, starting all of this work was where my response. Yes, I have to facilitate the best treatment I can for my daughter as a mom. That's my job, but I have to do my own work. And so when she asked me and I finally realized, oh, okay, I do have to start taking care of myself, I had to get quiet. Like, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what I needed. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know where to look. So I had never learned how to tap into my intuition or why that would even be important or what it even meant. So I just kind of got quiet for a little while. And the thing that came to me was a return to a creative practice because I'd been a very creative child. And that was another part of me that I just kind of lopped off. It was like, if you can't make a living at it when you grow up, it's a waste of time. And nothing could be further from the truth, first of all. And I could never have imagined where ultimately creativity would lead me and all the benefits I would get from it. But then it was just a matter of using it as a vehicle. Again, this really wasn't as conscious as it is now, but tapping into my own self,
Mm.
creating, getting back into finding color and texture and words and listening to inspirational speakers or reading an inspirational book and pulling parts of that out and applying that to myself and understanding, bumping up against that same discomfort that if something doesn't look the way I want it to. So my perfectionistic tendencies and my want to control the process, and what do you do if something doesn't look the way you want and you want to rip it to shreds and scream at the sky. It sounds a little dramatic because it was back then, to be honest. Like I did not really have any kind of relationship with myself except demeaning and mean. And
Mm.
we can try to hide that as much as we want to from the world, and we can put on a smile and we can do all the things, and we're ultimately we're not actually fooling anybody, especially our
We're not
kids,
ourselves or our kids. Yeah, for sure.
because that plays out in ways that are some ways that are obvious and many ways that are not obvious. But anyway, it was such an important part of beginning to understand what taking care of myself really meant, which I
Hmm.
believe self-care is totally misunderstood by
Yeah.
people in general today. For me, yes, all the external stuff is great. I love all the external stuff, but self-care in terms of understanding our own patterns, our own tendencies, how all of that self-harming stuff that, we do, the coping mechanisms that for me, I'm trying to move away from the word negativity because coping is coping. And like we have coping mechanisms because they help us cope.
Yeah.
So, but for me, like the more unhealthy ones move us away from connection rather than towards it. And so why am I choosing those things? Why am I drawn to doing that? Why, am I so convinced? Not that I no longer am, but that, I'm such a shitty person. Like I'm not, I'm actually awesome. Like where I'm resilient, I'm all these things, So I guess what I'm trying to say is my relationship with all of these things, you start where you start. You just start.
Yeah.
And then it all morphs and changes over time. But self-trust, I mean, yeah, I didn't have that.
Yeah.
And I think when you can't trust yourself, you don't know what well you're drawing from in terms of how to make decisions or what's guiding you. So our values can fall into that. I didn't have a conversation about my values until I was in my 40s. Like I didn't even know that was a thing, or like I could pick my own, like my family never talked about that family of origin.
Mm.
So, just one more example. So, why is self-trust important? Well, particularly in the context in which you mentioned it, if we're having to make decisions and we're basically on our own, because don't let anybody fool you, we're basically on our own
Yeah.
when our kids are ill for a number of reasons. How are we making those decisions? And what happens when they don't turn out the way we hope they will? Because inevitably that's going to happen. So how do you stay connected to yourself and feeling, to your point, like that sense of agency or, okay, what's next? And being okay with each step of the process is trusting the well from which you're making these decisions and how you feel about yourself in the process. And
Yeah.
I totally, didn't really understand that as we were going through all of this. And
Hmm.
I think to your last point, the self-love, I mean, that is really hard. And if you're
Yes.
someone for whom, saying, "Oh, I love myself," or Like I have a book somewhere that said, look in the mirror every day and say, I love you to your reflection. I mean, that literally made me want to barf. Like there's just like, no. So the idea of allowing myself to think, I want to allow myself to like me and, work through all of this stuff again as part of the process that became true. I didn't like set myself that particular goal one day where I woke up and said, by the end of this month, I am going to love myself.
Although I
Um,
don't mind it. I don't mind it as a goal. Like as a life coach, we talk a lot about intention and goal setting. And I'm like, yeah, you could do that and like just move the needle a little bit. Like, go ahead, mamas, just decide, yeah, I'm going to love myself more this month than I did last month.
or certainly be open to the possibility.
Yes. I
That's what I
remember
like.
like bridge thinking is like, I'm going to love myself. I'm going to consider loving myself. I'm going to be willing to consider loving
Right.
myself. Like whatever you got to do to get closer is great. Uh-huh.
100%. And I mean, I totally get, again, I probably said this already, but like, if you are someone like I thought everybody thought the way that I did, because that's just what we think. Like I
Yeah.
thought everybody over ruminated. I thought everybody had these people pleasing tendencies. I thought everybody, had levels of enmeshment and codependency. I thought no one knew what a boundary was, because had never even heard of that. I mean, we just assume, that like we're human, so we're kind of all the same, and we kind of all are the same, but we're also super not the same. So
Mhm.
if you're someone who didn't have a childhood like mine, you may be going, God, I mean, you know, like what the hell? All these things. But like a lot of us who, whether you're, you like the phraseology of like emotionally immature parenting, or my also specific brand was narcissistic parent.
Yeah,
So there was a lot
neglectful,
of
yeah,
like neglect
neglectful
and
parent.
rejection. So
Mhm.
there was a whole other level there of thinking and feeling that was true for me, that it was a shock to realize not everyone has. So these are patterns, right? So when we
Mhm.
talk about self-care, for me, I had to become aware, and it took a long time, that this was my reality. Like I really did not know that and I've been in a lot of therapy. I really did not know that for a very long time through the process. And then what that meant about what I had to learn
Mhm.
about the things you're talking about self-care, about self-trust, about self-love, and why those deficits existed for me, and that was my work, or your like reparenting language, whatever way
Mhm.
you like to
Mhm.
say it. It ultimately kind of boils down to the same thing.
Yeah, we heal, and our kids inevitably heal because we interact with them differently. That's just what happens. Like you said about the system changing. I have like 100 thoughts going through my head of things I want to say right now. I remember for me doing ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experience Survey. And it was when I was in a parent education program, oddly enough, that was very intensive when I learned nonviolent communication. And we did a lot of intensive work in that program. And I did the ACEs. And to see my childhood quantified like that, my score is 9 out of 10. And I was like, whoa, like, whoa, oh, the other people are like 1, 2. My husband did it. He's like 0.5 ish. Like, I was like, oh, we all have different stories here and different experiences and different things we're healing from. And that journey is going to look unique. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, and what I want to say about that is I'm really glad you brought that up, because my score is probably the same as your husband's.
Yeah.
So I never identified myself as an adult living with any kind of trauma because I didn't see myself in that kind of language.
Yeah.
So it is very important to have identifiers like that, and they serve a very important purpose, but they're also completely missing out on a whole realm of persons like myself who didn't have any of those experiences. And yet then, so I'm in my 50s by the time I figure out finally that the relational trauma I experienced was so high that I actually now do have a diagnosis of, chronic PTSD.
Hmm.
I would have laughed in your face a few
Yeah,
years
right,
ago
right,
if
right.
you would have told me that was me.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's just that's why these conversations are so important because
Yeah.
yes, there's people who see themselves very clearly and their experiences and they're validated and they understand through metrics like that. But there's a whole host of us who don't have that kind of experience, who are left out
Mm-hmm.
going, I don't fit in here. I don't
Yeah.
fit in anywhere. So
Well, it's
that just means,
little T traumas. Sometimes we think of them that way. But
right.
in your story, you really talk about having a neglectful, almost absent parent, right? Your mother was just very unavailable, emotionally unavailable. And so, yes, we do need better metrics to describe how your parenting affects you, how you were parented affects you. And most anyone listening to this podcast is like working very hard to not be neglectful or too permissive or too authoritarian because we want to be like that guiding steady beat, that's present and compassionate and loving. And that is what you found in your journey of getting to that place with faith. It's not like you weren't very attuned parent, like, or very present, and like you were like super involved in her life. But there's this little, like, not little, but this like little piece of your story that is so, so important. And it's late in the book that you talk about it. And it really is when you learn to, the way language I use is to become a compassionate witness of faith and of her pain and struggle. And there was, so much beauty in this one page, that I was wanting you to read what you wrote for us. Because when well, I teach this concept a lot about being compassionate with your children when they are in pain. I have phrases like be comfortable with your kids' discomfort, and fix it, change it, stop it, solve it is one of the things I say. Like, we want to get out of that fix it, change it, stop it, solve it. It's not an emergency. Like, really slowing down. Sometimes we then call that legit calm, deep calm. And in your process, it's very so clear. You go through this process of self love, self care, self trust, and you get to these deeper, deeper levels of calm, which this podcast has become a calm mama. And that is what I'm always trying to get us towards. And then when you are there, you're able to show up the way that you showed up. And so I wondered if you could just talk through that at page
Yeah. And
247, if you guys
yes, I
get your
can
book.
read it and talk through it because ultimately, I mean, I think one of the things that I had to discover was that, again, I agree with everything you said, except we have to back the bus up even further.
Mm.
So that I thought I was being compassionate. And I
Yes.
thought that taking my daughter to appointments and putting my life on hold and doing all these things was compassion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what I had to come to realize with my therapist was that those things are important, but human to human compassion is about more than taking somebody to appointments.
It's so true.
And to your point, like, so we can talk about compassion and we can talk about healing and we can talk about lots of big words, which I think most of us, I realize now, take for granted that we all mean the same thing.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so, we don't. We don't.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so that was what was such a shock is like you can think you know something and you can, it can be only the tiniest sliver. And so, yes, coming to this understanding relative to compassion between human beings, why that's important and what it means was a hugely life-changing part of our process for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Before you read it, I'm going to read this one part that you wrote because I think this is like where you started. You said, I had no trouble telling Faith I loved her, but conversations around the harder emotions, they were usually Theo, your husband, and me talking, Faith listening, and us minimizing her feelings or full on arguments. It's like that's so much what parenting looks like in these, in like little homes everywhere. And then what you get to, what you're about to read, is where we all want to be getting to. And it's that journey from talkie, and telling, and dismissing, or like, sure, you get to be sad, but da, 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 da. It's like this other thing that you do is so beautiful. So go for it. Just start
Right.
there.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just want to say, like, it's completely makes sense that most of us parent that way because we were parented that way.
Yeah.
So that's why these conversations are so important. I think the younger generations, I see my adult nieces and nephews with young kids, they're so much smarter about this stuff.
Mhm.
But I want us older folks to be less afraid to understand that things about how we learned are just not that healthy and great.
Yeah.
Like it makes complete sense. So let's just be like, okay, I know there's other ways, it doesn't mean we're bad people. It took me a while to figure that out, but it's okay. Like it just makes sense. Okay, so yes, from where you asked me to start, when dysregulation happened, because of course it did, Faith would cry. In her bedroom or the living room, she might fall to the floor, curl into a ball, and wail, painful thoughts, feelings, and emotions pouring out of her. If Theo was home, I ordered him to the garage, and he'd usually comply. Progress. Instead of reacting in fear, despair, and confusion, now, at least on the outside, I could respond differently. Calmness, concerted and focused, had required discussion with the therapists, input from faith, trial and error, and lots of practice for which life afforded me opportunity. Over time, I improved. I learned to sit on the floor, breathe, remain quiet, and very still, preventing my own body and my own emotions from being hijacked.
Okay, just pause there because I'm going to read it again because it's like this is really what it looks like. Sit on the floor, breathe, remain quiet and very still, preventing your own body and your own emotions from being hijacked. That's it right there. What I think, even what you said, like the younger generations, like they're good at it. And it's very hard for any of us to do this. When our child, you describe a girl who's on the floor curling into a ball and wailing, and painful thoughts and feelings and pouring out of her, and you're going to sit and remain quiet. Your brain is like, the mom brain in that moment is broken because you're like, I should be doing something. But if this is doing something, it's actually
Right.
the thing our kid needs. And then go on to I could witness there.
I could witness Faith's pain without trying, at least most of the time, to intervene or to fix, without floating away on waves of my own anxiety, without being swept up in currents of fear. It made complete sense to feel terrible when she felt terrible. Pithy quip. A parent is only as happy as their least happy child. But that dynamic exactly was what required my attention. Sweaty and spent, Faith would calm down, because she would always eventually calm down. Occasionally, when she wanted to, we'd talk about what had upset her, usually something to do with school. But often she was too exhausted for words, and I'd encourage her to recuperate with rest, sleep, music, art, or by watching a lighthearted TV show.
Perfect. Perfect. It's so good. It's so beautiful, Tracy. Thank you for writing this book,
Oh,
and
thank you.
for remembering the deep pain and the moments that you so beautifully talk about in this book. And I just, sweaty and spent, Faith would calm down because she would always eventually calm down. In this podcast and in my work, I call it a big feeling cycle. And I use the word cycle because a cycle always ends. And it's better than a temper tantrum or a meltdown, because those don't, what is that? How do you know? Like, if you can remember that this will come to an end and you're just there to be a witness, problem solving, dealing with the behavior, talking about it all later. And I just think you really beautifully demonstrated what becoming a calm mama is all about. Like,
Thank
just
you.
so beautiful. So I do recommend your book. Like, I've already sent it to some clients because I'm like, you guys need to read this. Because they're going through this thing right now. So tell us how to buy your book, which is obvious, but tell us how to buy
Thank
your
you.
book, and maybe just a little bit if people want to follow you or what you do
Yeah,
now.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. So it is available everywhere books are sold. So wherever is your favorite place to buy your books from, you'll find it there. So there's that. And then, yes, I have a website. It's my name, Tracy Yokas, TraceYokas, and the word creates.com. And I am endeavoring to build a community. I'm inviting anyone, moms in particular, but anyone who's interested in learning about this stuff, who's working on their own toolkit, who's trying to understand how to make more conscious choices in life, how to be more connected, compassionate, and grateful, to come on over and check it out.
Yeah. So the book is Bloodlines, a memoir of harm and healing. So be sure to get a copy. And I read it really fast. I just spent the afternoon, I read really quickly, but I could not put it down. Like it's really compelling the way that you wrote the story. And so it's like it's a little juicy. So, not to like make your life juicy, but it was just really compelling story. So I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming and being so honest and sharing with the Calm Mamas. And yeah, super grateful. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Mama, if you enjoyed this podcast episode, I want to encourage you to do two things. The first is go to my website, calmmamacoaching.com, and get a copy of the Stop Yelling cheat sheet. You'll get a step-by-step breakdown of the most important tool I teach, which is the pause break. And you'll also get 40 ideas to reset your body and balance your nervous system so you don't have to yell at your kids. You can get a copy of that, again, at my website, calmmamacoaching.com/stop yelling. The other thing I'd love for you to do is go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review this podcast so that other moms can discover empowering and helpful, practical parenting strategies, just like you did today. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. It means a lot to be in your ear every week and to support you on your parenting journey.